Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my very long October wrap up. I read a lot of books this month. I think I read 18 overall. I just had a really good reading month. I was loving reading. I just kept reading and I was reading books in a day because I was just loving it so much. I'm still kind of in that mood, so I'm hoping it will stay for the end of the year so I can get through my TBR quite quickly. But basically, yeah, I'm going to talk through all 18 books I read this month. I'm going to try and talk through them relatively quickly. Some of them I've already talked about in a whole reading vlog, so I won't talk about those in a lot of detail. Let's just dive straight in. So the first book I read this month was a reread as part of my rereading vlog, and that was A Little Something Different by Sandy Hall. This was one of my favourite books of 2014. It's essentially a romance between two people, but it's not told from their perspective, it's told from 14 other perspectives that aren't the people falling in love, so it's people viewing them falling in love. I wasn't a huge fan of this. At the time that I read it originally, it was one of the only romances I'd ever read, and I thought it was really cool, but now I just found it very cringe and I wasn't really a fan of it. I also feel like the story was mainly focused on the guy. Leah didn't really get any development and I really wish we'd see more of her. So I think I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, maybe 2.5, because it wasn't great. The next book is The Roommate by Rosie Danan. This is an adult romance book about a girl who moves into a house share with a guy who is a porn star. This was part of my Words and Kisses subscription for October. I was really excited to get it because I heard really good things about it and I've seen a lot of people raving about it and I did really enjoy it. It's much more explicit than I would like, but I think that kind of comes with the concept and the characters. There is a reason for how explicit it is because of the message it's portraying. But overall I found this really fun. It was really easy, quick to read. I think I read it in a day and I really enjoyed it. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It might be a 4.5, I'm not sure. With adult romances, I only rate them 5 out of 5 stars if I want to read them again. I'll only be able to tell if I want to read this again later on if I ever see myself reaching for it. The next book I have is another one of my 2014 rereads, and that is My True Love Gave to Me, which is a short story anthology edited by Stephanie Perkins. It's all based on Christmas. It felt really weird to be reading this in October. I think I should have waited, but I wanted to get that reading vlog out. Overall, weirdly, I had very similar thoughts to it that I had originally. There were some stories I really loved and some that I kind of hated, and they were the same stories this time around, but I think originally I just loved the stories that I loved so much that I gave it 5 stars, but I don't think I would give this 5 stars overall now just because I didn't like the other stories. My favourite stories were by Rainbow Rowell, Stephanie Perkins, Kirsten White and Matt de la Pena. I have reread Rainbow Rowell's story a lot. I read it quite frequently because they published it in like a smaller version on its own, but I haven't reread any of the others and I really love them and I think I will probably reread those at different points, maybe closer to Christmas and New Year's. I didn't really like the magical aspects of the stories. I think I preferred the more contemporary stories, as you can tell by the ones that were my favourite. So overall I think I gave this 3 out of 5 stars because it was just a bit meh overall. The next book I have is Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. If you saw my September book haul, I've been buying a lot of these Penguin English Library Classics editions because they're just so pretty. I love the spines in particular, and I challenged myself to read one at least. I was challenging myself to read a chapter of one every day. That lasted until I finished this, and I haven't read a chapter of any other one since. I love children's classics. I love the story of Peter Pan. This is very different than the story of Peter Pan I'm aware of, obviously, because the films are quite different because, you know, they're Disney-ified. But overall, I just love this story. I think it's so whimsical and magical, and I love children's classics. I also really prefer reading classics once I've seen an adaptation because I find it's easier for me to digest them because classics can be quite dense to get through. This one wasn't because, again, it's a children's classic, so it wasn't that dense, but I think seeing the film first kind of added something to this. I don't know. Usually I want to read the book before I watch a movie, but classics are the exception to that. Overall, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoy it, and I recommend it if you want to know more about the story of Peter Pan. The next book I've loaned out, so I only have the dust jacket, and that is Rites of Passage by Joy N. Hensley. This is one of my 2014 rereads as well. This story follows a girl who is part of the first female class in a military school, and there's a lot of hazing. There are a lot of people who don't want her there, and it's about people trying to force her out and her determination to stay in. And I loved this the first time, and I really loved it this time. I think it's such a unique story, and the way it tells the story is really different, and I don't know why it doesn't have as much love. I've honestly never seen anyone else talk about this book. I remember when it was coming out, people were talking about it, and that's why I picked it up, but then no one actually read it, and I don't know why because it's so good. And I really wish more people have read this book because I think it's worth the hype. My only criticism is that I think it could have done with more development of the story. I think this could have been really a duology or a trilogy just to see more of what happens because it does run through her whole first year of this military school in this book that's like 400 pages, I think it is. So I think it could do with a little bit more development to the story, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. My next read was another 2014 reread, and that is Landline by Ray Morrell. I love this book originally. This follows a girl who is going through marital problems, and then when she goes to her childhood home, there's a phone there that allows her to talk to her husband, I think 10 years prior, 12 years prior, when they were having their first major fight, when they were still dating. And I really liked this. The first time round I loved it, but I think I only loved it because I loved Ray Morrell's stories. But I understood this a lot more now, even though I'm not married and I've never been married. But like, I understand it more, I think, because I read more adult stories at that time. I don't think I'd read any, maybe one. I really appreciate this a lot more. I especially appreciate Neil a lot more, the main guy. I think first time around I wasn't really happy with him. I didn't like him. I wanted her to be with Seth, who's her best friend. But this time around it was very much the opposite. I hated Seth. I thought he was really irritating. And Neil, like, he's very different than your normal love interest in novels. He's very quiet, he's very reserved, he's very, I don't know, you never see him like really truly open up, but I think that's what's great about him in a way. It's hard to explain, but I think Neil is great. I think this story is great. I wasn't a huge fan of the magical realism aspect just because I don't like magical realism. I don't like things that aren't explained. So I only gave it 4 out of 5 stars, also because there are a few passages here and there that are a bit iffy, but overall I quite enjoy this. The next book I read was another 2014 reread, and that was Alienated by Melissa Landers. This is definitely not my kind of thing anymore. This is essentially like Twilight with aliens. In this, humankind are aware of aliens, and aliens are coming down for the first time for like a high school exchange thing. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea, but high school exchange. 3 alien students are coming down, and they're gonna live with a host, and then they're gonna go over there in the next book. I just found this so cringe. It was just so tacky and the writing was a bit iffy. I really enjoy some of Melissa Landers' other books, Starflight mainly, I love that book, but this was just too cringe for me. I think it's definitely a case of when I was 15 I loved this book, 21 years old, definitely not for me anymore. I also felt like the romance developed so fast with like no reason for it. Like I never saw what they actually saw in each other. It just had like a mutual attraction, and then he was abandoning his whole race for her, and it just didn't make sense. So I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, not my vibe. And my final 2014 reread was Isla and the Happily Ever After by Stephanie Perkins. This is the 3rd book in the companion novel series, a romance between Isla and Josh, who is St. Clair's best friend from book 1. I've never reread Anne and the French Kiss. I've reread Lola and the Boy Next Door a few times, and I really enjoy it. This one was really interesting because it's very different than most romances. Within like 20% of the book, like the first 100 pages, Isla and Josh are in a relationship, and it's essentially about them working through their problems, but it was just irritating because it was the same problem every time. She just was really insecure about the fact that he was in a relationship for 4 years before her and she wasn't, and it just was the same argument, and Josh never did anything to cause an argument, so I just didn't really get it. I think Isla and Josh read a lot younger than they're meant to be because they're meant to be 18. They read like they were about 15. And I just don't think this is a book for me. With all of my 2014 rereads, I think it's very much a case of they're designed for younger audiences, for the younger teens, and I am not in that age demographic anymore. So whilst I don't enjoy them as much now, I still love and appreciate them for what they did at that time, and also why I love them at the time, and I think anyone who's around that age will still enjoy these. So I end up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. After that, I decided to pick up a really fast read, and that is Dear Justice by Nick Stone. This is a sequel to Dear Martin, which I read earlier this year. I want to say June, July, maybe, at some point. I really enjoyed that one. It was, again, a really short, impactful book. This follows Quan, who is in prison for a crime he didn't commit. But it's very different to Dear Martin in the sense. I think Nick Stone explains it a lot more, because there's an author's note to begin the book, and it's about how she wanted to write a book that portrays black young men accurately. In Dear Martin, justice was very much an exception to the societal norms that are expected of black men, but this was following those norms and then seeing what happens. And I thought this was a really impactful book because it felt very realistic, because Quan felt like a very modern black teenager, and I think this was a really impactful book. It's very short, I think it's about 250 pages, but both of them are really impactful and really well done. I also found it interesting because Quan, the main character, has committed crimes in the past, which a lot of people would automatically push him to the side for that, but he didn't commit this crime, and they're determined to get him free because even though he has committed crimes in the past, the crime for which he is in prison, he did not commit. So it's all about getting justice for that, even though he has done some dodgy things before. And I think it was just a really different book, and I think it's a really great book personally. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I love it. I love this duology. I don't know if she's going to write anymore, but I just love it. Then on the same day, I actually read a very similar book and also a very fast read, and that is Punching the Air by Ibi Zoboi and Yusuf Salaam. So this is again about a young black male who goes to prison for a crime he did not commit. This is co-written by Yusuf Salaam, who is one of the exonerated 5, the Central Park 5, which I know the story of it. I don't know it fully because I haven't seen like any of the documentaries. I know there's When They See Us on Netflix, which is a dramatization of it that I really want to watch, especially after finishing this. This story is written in verse. It's quite chunky, but it's really fast to get through because it's poetry, and it's such an impactful read. I love stories told in verse because even though I don't read them that often, when I do read them, they have a great impact, and I think it's really powerful. I thought the writing was really beautiful. I've never read any of Ibi Zoboi previous novels. I wanted to read Pride, I think it is, but I haven't picked it up yet, and I just think it was so well done. My only complaint is that I wanted a clearer ending, but that's just because I don't like open-ended endings. So I still think this is a really good book, and I highly recommend it. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, if you couldn't tell. So after reading 2 hard-hitting YA contemporaries, I needed something light-hearted and fun. So I picked up You Had Me at Ola by Alexis Daria. I don't know if I'm saying that right. My pronunciation is awful sometimes. This is an adult romance set in like a telenovela kind of world. The main guy, Ashton, is a telenovela star, and he's trying to make his break in Hollywood. She's a soap opera star, and she's trying to make her big break outside of what she's already been in, and they're doing this show together, and it's just about them falling in love. I thought it was really fun, cute. It was very quick to get through. This was another Words and Kisses subscription pick. I think it was the October pick as well as The Roommate, and I really enjoyed it. I think it was really fun and light. Personally though, I'm not a huge fan of celebrity romances or just celebrity stories. I find them kind of boring. They're all very repetitive. It's very similar vibe. So I wasn't a huge fan of that aspect, but overall I quite enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars overall. Next, I finished my audiobook that I've been listening to for about a month, and that is If I Don't Have You by Sarita Domingo. I was really enjoying this. I just was never listening to audiobooks, honestly. This follows 2 people, Kayla and Ren, who meet one night because she is interviewing him for his new film. He is a director, she is a journalist, and then they have this like chemistry. As soon as they meet, they have this undeniable chemistry, and they're just kind of connected to each other. It's kind of hard to explain, but they feel this weird connection with each other even though they don't know anything about the other person, and it's about their lives and intertwining and everything like that. It actually kind of had similar vibes to me to You Had Me at Ola, but I think that's because I read them very close together. But overall, I quite enjoyed this. The whole aspect of the undeniable chemistry is something I'm not usually a huge fan of because it's usually falls into like love at first sight, but I kind of liked the way that Sarita Domingo dealt with this. I thought it was a really interesting way to talk about it. I'm personally a fan of like slow burn romances and romances that take a while to actually develop into a romance, so this was not my usual type, but I still really liked it, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was The Reckless Afterlife of Harriet Stoker by Lauren James. This is as spooky as I was gonna get. I was not gonna get any spookier than this. I love Lauren James's books. This is her latest novel. It's the spookiest. It is about Harriet Stoker, who dies one day in this old abandoned student accommodation. When she dies, she becomes a ghost, and she revives all these other ghosts, and she's kind of determined to get her ghost power, and she will do anything to get it because when you're a ghost you have a very specific power. I was not prepared for this book, so to begin with I was just really confused because I really hated Harriet. I spoke to my friend and she told me that you're kind of meant to hate her because I think she is an antagonist, and once I realised that, I was fine. I loved this book after that. I read it all in one sitting. It's quite big, but I just couldn't stop reading because it was so addictive to figure out what was going to happen next. What I love the most about Lauren James's stories is that they're very addictive and the plot twists in them are shocking. Like, you cannot see anything coming in these books. This one was probably the most shocking to me. I couldn't stop reading it. I was so addicted. I'd never read anything like it because I don't read anything slightly spooky or scary. I don't read anything about ghosts. I just avoid that overall. but this is one of the best books I've read all year. I think it was so cleverly done. I loved most of the characters except for Harriet because she sucked. Felix was my favourite. I do like Casper as well, and Remo was quite nice, and then Leah was interesting to follow. But overall, I loved this story. I think it's so well done. I love reading it. I'm trying to get more people to read it because it's so good. So overall, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I have is The Pieces of Ourselves by Maggie Harcourt. This is a UK YA book. I've read her previous novels and I really enjoyed them. This is about a girl who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and has kind of stuck to herself ever since. She had a bit of a breakdown in school, doesn't go to school anymore, she works in a hotel. Then one day this guy Hal turns up and he is researching something at the hotel related to like the history of it, and she is helping him out with that. Overall, I liked this. It's not my favourite. I didn't like it as much as I liked her other books. I think my main issue is kind of from the tagline, I should have seen it coming, where it's, when you've fallen apart, can you ever fall in love? And it kind of had this whole vibe of, can romance fix you, essentially, and I didn't really like that. Maggie Harcourt was kind of making a point towards the end of being like, romance didn't fix her, it didn't free her, she just freed herself. But I just think it just didn't work well, because it kind of felt like, oh, you fall in love and all your problems are fine, and I don't think that is a good thing to portray personally. I still enjoy parts of the story. I think the mental health representation itself was quite good. I think that the history aspect of them researching things was quite interesting, though I personally am not interested in history a lot of the time. Overall, I'd probably give this 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's not my favourite, but I'm happy I read it. The next book I have is Breathless by Jennifer Niven. I got this as an e-arc from NetGalley and then I bought a physical copy because I have her other book, so I just thought I'd get it. This follows a girl whose parents are getting divorced and she is forced to move to an island for the summer that's like a really remote island with her mom to do some like research on stuff, and she falls in love there. Overall, I wasn't a huge fan of this. I actually kind of hated it. I think it's very, very similar to All the Bright Places. If you liked All the Bright Places, you'll probably like this. I did like All the Bright Places when I read it 5 years ago, so it's been a while. I just think this is probably best for a younger audience, but then again, it is very explicit for a YA book, so I don't know if it is good for a younger audience. I just think the romance just felt very surface level. I don't think we delved enough into things. I think overall it just wasn't great. It was addictive. I read it all in one day because I was really interested to see where it was going, but it's not something that will stick with me. I'll probably forget the characters' names within like 2 weeks, so it's not a great book in my opinion. I ended up giving this 2 or maybe 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's not great. And the next book I have is The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. This is very reflective, so let's hope you can actually see something. This is a YA fantasy book that's coming out next February, I think it is. I got sent an e-arc and also a physical copy, so thank you to Osborne for sending this to me. This is set in a world where when girls turn 16, they have to do a purity test and they have to bleed. One of the priests has to cut them and they have to bleed, and if they bleed red, then they're pure. If they bleed gold, then they're a demon. And our main character obviously bleeds gold, but then she gets called into this army. The Emperor is building this army of demons that he wants to fight for him, and she gets called into this army, and that's the basic premise. I've mentioned it many times on this channel that I've been struggling with fantasy so far this year, but I decided to pick this up because I really wanted to try and force myself through some fantasy books, and I ended up really loving this. I read it really quickly. I think I read it in like 2 days, which is shocking for me with a YA fantasy book because I don't read a lot of fantasy. I was really addicted to this world. I thought the concept was really unique. Whilst it did fall into like your regular YA fantasy tropes, I think the way it dealt with it was really interesting, and I liked the whole feminism, empowering aspect. I wish this was one of the fantasy books I was reading when I was a younger teen, like 14, 15, because it's very similar in vibe, but more empowering and more diverse, which is what we need. I also like how it wasn't very confusing, because my main thing with fantasy books is that for the first 100 or so pages you're just confused, you don't know what's happening, and it's very weird to get through, but this was very easy to understand and I wasn't very info dumpy. It was just well done. I'm also intrigued to see where this goes next because it kind of read like a standalone. The ending was very satisfactory. I don't really crave a sequel, so I'm interested to see what the sequel takes from here and where it goes. But overall, I really like this, and I think you should look out for it when it comes out next February. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, or maybe 4.5, I'm not sure. Next we have Fangirl Volume 1, which is the manga adaptation of my favourite book of all time, Fangirl, which is right there. I struggled to get my hands on this. It came out mid-October in the US and it was a struggle to find it anywhere. I ordered it at the time. It took 2 weeks to dispatch, even though it's coming from the UK, so I don't know why it took so long. But yeah, this is volume 1. It's going to be 4 volumes in total to adapt the whole novel. I loved this, obviously. It's my favourite story of all time. Like, I'm always going to love this. I also reread Fangirl after finishing this, but I haven't included that on here because I reread Fangirl like once a month, honestly. So if I include it every single month, it'll be a bit boring. I think this volume ended in a really good place. It did a really good way of adapting it. I think it was really well done. It kept to the story really well. It just was very heartwarming to me to read, so I loved it. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, obviously, like I always was going to. And then the final book I read this month was Love is a Revolution by Renee Watson, which is an e-arc I had on NetGalley. This also comes out next February in the UK, I believe. I think January in the US, but February in the UK. It follows a girl in Harlem who is not really involved in this whole activism world, but everyone around her is. Her cousin that she lives with is very into activism and protests, and she's part of this group called Inspire Harlem. Whereas the main character just wants to do what she wants to do. She wants to have fun. She doesn't want to think about like climate change and stuff like that. And then she meets a guy as part of this Inspire Harlem event that she goes to, and she starts lying and changing herself to make it seem like she's one of these activist kind of people, and it kind of follows on from there. I thought this was a really unique concept. I liked the idea of someone not wanting to be like socially active in a way. It's hard to explain. I like the idea of someone not wanting to take a stand and wanting to just enjoy her life, because she was very adamant. She was like, I don't think you guys are practicing self-care. You're not truly caring about yourselves. You're caring about the world. It's all about the balance between taking a stand and also taking time out for yourself and making sure that you are having a good time and you are enjoying yourself, because what is the point in volleying for a better world if you are not enjoying that world that you have at the moment? And I think this was a really unique concept. That's why I requested on NetGalley, because I've never heard anything like it. I think it was done quite well. I do think it felt quite young. I've only read one of Renee Watson's books in the past, and that was her middle grade book, What Mama Left Me. So I don't know if that's an aspect of why I felt like it felt young, but it just felt like it was about like a 14, 15-year-old rather than being about an 18-year-old. And I think it should have been about a 14, 15-year-old, because I think that would have been an interesting thing for someone that age to read. I still think it's a really good book and I really like the concept, and I will probably buy a copy when it comes out. I think you guys should look out for it too, because I think you'll like it. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked it, but not quite 5 stars. So yeah, that was my very long October wrap up. I have been filming for ages. This is going to be a very long video and very hard to edit, which is going to be fun. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you read any of these books, what your favourite book of the month was. Let me know down below, and I will see you in my next video.